All right, greetings, Hotel Paguaba, bless up. Welcome back to the Recovery Room of Racism Not Anonymous with me, Sis Abinah, the recovering African who is enslaved in America, and who is a representative from the voices and the margins. I am also true to the cause of African liberation via unification and utilizing the tool of healthy and effective communication. It is in that spirit that I come to share with you some thoughts and feelings that was triggered as I listened to Brother Umar Abullah Johnson, or rather Dr. Umar Abullah Johnson, in a clip he did, or that was entitled "The Black Elitist." Also, I then watched another one with him and Professor Griff. That was done right here in, the city of brotherly love and sisterly affection, as they say, Philadelphia, home and birthplace of the United States Constitution and independence and so forth. And at any rate, as I listen to them, and it's not just them, yeah, this was the trigger and the emphasis for my dialogue at this moment. What I hear many of us doing, us, by us, I mean activists for liberation, for justice, for the upholding of the laws of the land as it relates to human rights, the assurance of human rights of individuals and peoples within nations. Those of us who have a calling, a purpose, a plan to support, assure, and defend each individual and group, individual, family, and group with having those things: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Dr. Johnson, I recognize as a voice in that struggle, as he appears to utilize his knowledge, education, and information to expose the humanitarian crisis, if you will, or symptoms of the humanitarian crisis that appears to plague the planet right now. Humanitarian crisis reflected in and emerging from the numerous violations of human rights. As I listened to him talk on this last one, he talked specifically regarding active enslavement of Africans here in America, and situations that were set up to support African descendants with becoming dependent, maintaining them in a state of dependency through the teachings of the Europeans at that time. What I find troubling as I listen to Dr. Johnson and others who talk and teach as he does, is the misnomer, if you will, the incorrect communication that the people, if you will, are the problem. For example, as I listened to him reference black folks whom he labels elitist, and he said that second to the system of racism, white supreme lunacy in the lives of African descent, that the second most detrimental factor or faction in the lives of African descendants were black, quote-unquote, black elitists, and that through their the behaviors consistent with elitism and behaving in an elite fashion. It is those behaviors that are supporting, promoting, and maintaining many African descendants, or the masses of us, in a negative state. And as I listened, I thought, well, it seems to me that the expressed behavior of a quote-unquote elitist, or someone who practices elitism, which is holding themselves above another human, and because I have this, and that, therefore that gives me permission and sanction to mistreat you who are below me and beneath me. That type of thinking, that mentality, and that culture in and of itself, when it's seen in an African descendant, is a symptom of the system of racism, white supreme lunacy. It's a symptom of the problem. It is not and can never, and I believe that it is incorrect communication to broadcast, to say, promote the notion that that is in fact the problem, or even one of the problems. If the problem is the problem, and the problem is the establishment and maintenance of the system of racism, white supreme lunacy. And that is the problem for African descendants the world over. Everywhere we are on this planet, on this globe, at this particular time, we have been victimized by the system of racism, white supreme lunacy. That system is a style of thinking and behaving in the world that came out of the minds, and I don't really think that there's a heart there, but we'll say the heart also, with just the mind and the behaviors of the Europeans. It is their cultural way of being in the world. It is part of who they are. Their germ seed. They're a silly. I'm not going to try to pronounce it Umatu or Su or which one of them, but they're cultural germ. And that when African descendants practice or partake in and or practice a particular way of thinking and behaving, whenever we do something that supports mistreatment or harm to another African descendant in any way, shape, or form, that we are at that point displaying the symptoms of the illness. The illness being the European cultural assili, their way of thinking and behaving in the world. That is the problem, and it becomes, it adds insult to injury, I have found, when African descendants begin to focus on and utilize the same tools that the European did in order to gain the ears, the eyes, the heart, and the mind of the African descendant. Whenever tactics like that are used, blaming, that's the blame game, and doing so from a position of leadership and or power, and supported by, because you can only have leadership and power, leadership where you have a following who supports you and or empowers you to be out there where many can hear you. That when you have that going on, it becomes crucial to use it in a way, and I find, and so in that regard even, I find that to be symptomatic when Umar and or others use labels to describe African descendants, blame African descendants in any way, shape, or form at this time as being the problem and what they're doing as the problem. And while what the people are doing is in fact problematic because it does promote further harm and maintains the system, to focus on that focusing on that first without focusing on the source, the problem, which is the system of injustice that's in place, the system of racism, white supreme lunacy, the system that says it's okay for me to put down, denigrate, marginalize, negate, verbally abuse and or chastise the people who need the most help and charge them with having the illness that they have, when we understand, as we talk to them about how they were victimized by this broader societal system. And I do encourage and support a thinking about how people think and present information. Folks of African descent, how you present information to other African descendants, and what it requires really, and first and foremost, because as I listen to him on YouTube and I see so many other videos on YouTube and people saying stuff like similar, I recognize that because there were some other videos, I was looking at the titles of them and how it's about, people are always speaking about another group of black people as opposed to speaking and looking at self. How are you practicing and portraying some of the same symptoms of this illness and this addiction to power and control, which is at the heart of the addiction of the European, as I have come to know. And that whenever any one of us thinks and behaves in the way that the European does and has in the world, then we are, in fact, ourselves propagating that system. And in the recovery room of Racism Non-Anonymous, we take the chance and we take the opportunity to explore and look at self, first and at the same time simultaneously. Now I have misplaced my remote control because that's where I want to stop at. Thank you for listening to me share, and certainly the recovery room is open for people to come and share with me your thinking, your experiences, and that's been my experiences, and in fact I've had experiences with the brother that for me support him being in the category of being a sort of quote-unquote elitist, based on his behaviors, based on his interactions with me, based on my experiences with him. I experienced him as being extremely patriarchal in his thinking and behaving towards me, and highly elite, quote-unquote elitist as well. And so it's like, that's interesting. That's the pot calling the kettle black. And I recognize that it's symptomatic for him and that he's simply being symptomatic of the same illness that we have all been infected with, that European viral infection lies, and the lies that, we tell are the lies we tell to ourselves about ourselves and what we're doing individually. And I believe that healthy and effective communication calls for us to always look at self as well and expose that shit. Thanks for listening.